So I've known you for quite some time, but I never actually heard the story about how you got involved into politics.
Well, for politics, I've been involved for a very long period of time, starting with Progressive Youth. That was way back when, with Roosevelt Brown, for those that know. And then I've always been interested in serving people from just my lifetime, I suppose. And then more recently, I was appointed to the Senate after I ran in C12. C12 was one of the strongholds of the OBA. And if you recall, Craig Kennedy was the leader, but not elected member of parliament. And so John Barrett resigned, Craig Kennedy ran in the by-election, and I ran against him for the first time. And then following that, I ran in C12 proper. Then came to C7 against Richards, MP Richards, and then I ran again in 2020, and that's when I first won. And that was the first time the PLP actually won in that area.
Right.
And so I was quite excited. And so now I'm ready to go.
And so what was that feeling? What, did you have an inkling that you would win? What was the, I guess, what was the feedback on the doorstep back in 2020?
In 2017, the first time around, it was, I think I did not have the vision or the belief that I would win.
Okay.
And it worked against me. In 2020, it was all in.
Okay.
And so the same this time around, it's all in, recognizing that there are some persons who have some questions. But what I've done, to be honest, is to make sure I appeal to the diversity. We have working class and we have super rich. And so what I do is I talk to everyone and I just demonstrate that I'm there, I'm genuine, I'm caring, and I can deliver what I propose to do.
Got you. And so what about professional? What is your professional background? What does that look like for those who wouldn't know?
Well, I did the traditional thing in terms of, I will emphasize this, I attended all public schools in Bermuda, public.
Understood.
Right? So I went to East End Primary, then I went to Work Academy when it was public, because there was no way we could have afforded the private fees, right? Then I went to Bermuda College, then to Acadia, and came back and worked at Price Waterhouse. And I actually qualified as what we call a professional accountant in 1990.
Okay.
So to today, I've been doing this for more than like 34 years now. And so I am experienced in terms of running businesses. I understand accounting, but I really run business as opposed to do accounting. And I've been doing that for quite a while.
Gotcha. And so you've run your own businesses, and obviously that incorporates leading people.
Yes.
What types of, I guess, experiences have you taken and implemented into your parliamentary career, I guess, that has helped you become who you are today?
The best thing I would say is diversity. What I don't like at all is what I call groupthink, and that is where everybody does the exact same thing, because one of the codes is that where everybody thinks the same, there's not much thinking that takes place. And so what I believe is that we have to be able to listen. And also, by the way, what happened is I used to teach accounting to adults at Bermuda College some time ago. And before I did that, they taught me how to teach adults. And one of the key things is to listen. Listen and listen again before you start to interact. And so that's one thing I do in the party now, is to try to listen, listen, and listen. Give my opinion, of course, but recognize that there's going to be some differences in terms of decisions. And for me, that's really the give and take, that people don't realize that we do quite a bit when it comes to our caucus meetings.
Gotcha. And what would you say is missing in terms of members of a party or members of government really, I guess, creating opportunities or spaces for persons to be heard?
What's missing, to be honest, is, and I don't want to keep going back to myself, but we had a meeting with the constituents last week, Wednesday, and in that, for one of the first times, really, many people came out and we were able to talk through different issues, and one of those things was for the cost of living. The question was, what has government done? I explained that we reduced the customs duty on many of the essential items, and the point was then, okay, fine, but that has not reached back to the consumers. And we talked about the fact that the Cost of Living Commission, they can actually mandate for the retailers to come back and show how the reductions in customs duty meet, go right down to the end. And so the comment back to us was that government did not do that. And I know they're right, by the way, because the government we have not followed through to the retailers to say, listen, show us how this reduction has reduced prices to the consumers. And so I think that's a big one.
Gotcha. And what would you say, what are some things that your constituents in C7 have highlighted during this, I guess, past perhaps 6 months or since you've been canvassing in preparation for the general election?
Sure. The one thing that they've highlighted is the club. So the Hamilton Workmen's Club, which you call the Cleveland Club, right, in Davos Hill, at the moment, well, before it was one club, 2 levels, but one club. And so the biggest issue was that if you had a children's party, for example, and they had to use the bathroom, they would go downstairs through the bar to use the bathroom, which I thought was inappropriate. And so we've worked quite a while now to get that sold. And now what we've done is You can have a children's party upstairs, there's a bathroom upstairs, and you can have the whole event without children going downstairs to the bar. I think that's been an excellent one. And the long-term treasurer was Gina Gibbons, and we worked together to ensure even that the government would assist with funding the renovations. And so now I believe it's one of the better clubs and can be used as an example for other clubs as to how things can be improved for the community. That was a big one.
That's a good point. And what are some of those conversations that are taking place? What would we like to see in the community? How can, I guess, the Harrington Workmen's Club facilitate that?
It is, we have one, in my mind, one big thing to do, and that is to sort out the parking, because right now there's not as much parking. And so to the back, there is some excavation that can be done. Once that's done, then we can use the actual physical club for all kinds of things. It can be a daycare, for example, if persons choose to do so. They also have a commercial kitchen, and so persons have already asked about that in terms of can they sublet the kitchen to provide services to the community. That's a big one for Bermuda. And then just to make sure that the community gathers together and recognizes that as, in fact, a community hub. And then I think we can go from strength to strength.
Gotcha.
And so what I've done is I agreed to be on the executive as the assistant treasurer, and I've been working with them on a regular basis now to make that happen.
That's good. So there's a subset of your community, perhaps in C7, that doesn't frequent Devil's Hole.
Yes.
What are their types of concerns? What are some things they'd like to see in the community?
So now you're being polite. So I believe that the C7 area is a microcosm of Bermuda, meaning that we have the working class and the middle class and the super rich, essentially. And so what we do, what I've done is through my private work actually, made contact with many of them. And so what we do is we try to engage them in terms of what do they want. And they want, to be honest, same thing as us in terms of Bermuda remaining safe, the Bermuda government putting in place guidelines and rules whereby they can flourish. And so now what we have is the evidence of the government's success. One of those has been significantly increased payroll tax. That comes because businesses are thriving. And that happens because the government is putting in place good practices to allow them to thrive. And I smile all the time because if you drive from, say, Devil's Hole going east to St. George's, you see many houses being built. And what that means to me is that cash is king. If they didn't have the money, if they didn't have the confidence, they would not invest money in Bermuda. And because they are investing money, it means they do have the confidence. And so that's how I've been able to bridge the gap. And also, traditionally, we know that some persons will never vote for the PLP. And so when I canvass, I ask the question, and then we challenge and talk about, listen, let's look at my background if necessary, and understand that, yes, we do have business persons and professionals in the Progressive Labour Party who are able to do all these things, and it really is a matter of having a conversation and making sure people understand what we can do. And so for me, it's been quite successful in that regard.
Got you. I guess that makes me think of two things. The first is that sometimes the government is criticized for the assertion or the idea that they are supporting an economy that's, allowing business to flourish.
Yes.
But I think the other point, or perhaps do you want to speak to that first?
Sure.
Because the other one's perhaps.
They do that. And just last week, I was canvassing and I met a gentleman, him and his wife actually, and they own a small business. And they are committed to having Bermudians in their workplace. They have apprenticeship schemes, but they did not know, for example, that under the payroll tax, you can actually get a break if you have an approved scheme. Similarly, they were not aware that the workforce development have plans whereby they can help to fund the salaries of the apprentices. And so by doing that, I was able to assist them. And it's a win-win, because now it means that there is the ongoing opportunity for Bermudians, just regular people, to get training and then to move into substantive jobs. And the joke was, I guess, that their training program is so good that after they train their employees, other companies come in and snatch their employees. And so even knowing that, they are still committed to Bermudanization, and they make sure that their apprenticeship plan keeps on going. And so I think that's another example whereby there is a win-win, and it's not as if supporting business does not support us employees.
So as a government, we've done a lot. We've made a lot of changes in terms of amendment to legislation. We've increased funding and support for different groups of people. How do you think you, as the MP for C7, can do a better job at delivering the message of the work being done by the government to your constituents?
Well, again, it's difficult sometimes because while time goes on, we just do so many different things. But again, we had a meeting last week, Wednesday, and I think that's the model, whereby we should probably have a meeting at least once a month, maybe once every other month, and bring the community together and have them ask questions, and then we should be able to report back as to what has taken place. One of the challenges now, I think it is the sugar tax.
Yep.
And so at the meeting, the question was, Anthony, the sugar tax is not working. So we were able to explain that we amended it to make it applicable to less products, but now the push is, can it be eliminated? And so that's one whereby I'm going to go back and forth. And when we have our next meeting, they'll hold me accountable. Anthony, we asked you this, what's the status? So I think that's the better piece that we can do now to make sure people are engaged, and also to, on a regular basis, report back as to what the government is doing or has done. I think that will solve that problem.
Got you. That's important. I think the other thing is, what are the people telling you? Right now, the Progressive Labor Party, they're running an election. They have a campaign based on building a fairer Bermuda.
Yes.
What has been the reception of the members of C7? Do you use different messaging depending on the house that you're visiting, given that there's such a diverse representation here?
Yeah. And so you're right, by the way, in terms of the messaging has to be varied to some degree, depending upon who I'm talking to and what questions they hear. And so let's just take the corporate income tax or even the minimum wage. The minimum wage has been important to everyone, especially someone that earns less than that. And so one of my constituents used to earn less than $6 an hour. So the minimum wage caused him to come up to $16 and $40. He was very happy with that. From the business side, it was, okay, what will this impact have on you? And they actually talked about it in terms of they were happy because it ensures that their workers at least have a base level of income. And then for the government, they also did some things for the business, which was they adjusted their payroll tax liability. And so I think that was a win-win on both sides. And also just to keep recognizing that the government does do things across the board, and depending on who I'm talking to, is to bring that appropriate information to them.
Okay.
I also said earlier about the business that I was talking to. They would have benefited because there is the payroll tax reduction for them, and also government will be paying for some of the employees that are apprentices. And that's how we do it.
Gotcha. And just because we're coming to the end, if resources weren't an issue, where would you focus your efforts in terms of a government and funding and all of the government services that we have? What do you think is most important to tackle?
Well, based upon the feedback, it's going to be, again, the cost of living. And so what we're doing about, say, food prices, what we're doing about rent. And to be honest, I think that the food price is probably more applicable, more so because it touches all of us. I gave the example some time ago whereby I was in St. George's to buy some eggs. They were almost $10. And I was like, doesn't make any sense.
Couldn't believe.
Correct. But then I drove around and found eggs at $4, and it would have been good if I knew from the beginning where to get the eggs. And so even though it's a small thing, I think it's a big thing whereby the government's going to have a plan where you can see what the prices are of these goods at various locations to at least assist you. But more importantly, it's going to be what can we do to introduce competition.
Gotcha.
And I think if we do that effectively, then it'll work. But again, it requires us to buy those things that are cheaper, because a can of cream costs, let's say, $4. If I sell you something for $1, you're going to think something's wrong with the cream. And so we have to now adjust ourselves to realizing that, no, Anthony has a better price as opposed to there being something wrong. And I think that's one of our things in terms of we have tremendous brand loyalty, tremendous brand loyalty. And so we have to make some adjustments in that regard, if that's where we are.
That's good. And finally, there's been a lot of commentary about, I guess, the presence of 110 candidates indicating that, democracy is alive and well.
Yes.
My concern or my caution is that we have to be mindful about the quality of the candidates that will ultimately represent our government. Do you have any thoughts around the increased representation this time around? So
Marcus Garvey has said, right, that a man without knowledge of his culture or his history is like a tree without roots. And what that means is that there's no sustained life. What the Bible says is that there's nothing new under the sun. And so now we have to understand this. Before 1964, Bermuda was actually run by independents. And what they used to do is go to the yacht club, make decisions, and then come back to Parliament and formalize those decisions. The PLP was formed in 1963 to ensure that Bermuda had more social justice and social equity. That was in 63. What the independents did is in 1964, they formed the UBP, not because of any ideology, but because they wanted to defeat the PLP. And the UBP then ran Bermuda for like 30 years. And then in more recent times, what happened is that there were some disaffected people within the UBP, and they ultimately formed the BDA. Dr. Braun came to power as the premier, and he said that he was going to run for one term, which he did. Then he resigned or retired, and then Mark Bean ran in his position in C26. And he ran against the UBP and the BDA, and they lost. So PLP won. That's when Mark Bean first became an MP. And then what happened is the UBP and the BDA, they said, you know what, we cannot beat the PLP, so they joined together and formed the OBA. And then we fast forwarded, and so in the by-election when Michael Dunkley resigned, that was in C10, we had the PLP, the OBA, and Independent. That's when it first came to the fore. That's when Sir John Swan ran. And then afterwards, more recently, in C36, there was another by-election, and that's when you had the PLP, the OBA, the FDM, and an Independent. They still couldn't beat the PLP. And if you recall, right on that same night, Mark Bean said they should all gather together to fight the PLP. And what was interesting is, on that night, Ariana Richardson, for the OBA, he said, okay, fine, I'll open to conversation. About a week later, he said, no, I'm not going to do that. And so that all canceled out. But now what's happened is, more recently, which is actually this week, the FDM chairman, Omar Dill, he has said that, yes, they should all now gather together against the PLP. And so what that shows is that, based upon the strength of the PLP, all the other opponents, the independents, the FDM, and the OBA, they will consider joining together, not because of a common ideology, but more so because they want to have one goal, which is to defeat the PLP. And so if we think about all that, and I know many people are not aware of that history, right, is that the PLP is the only party that has stood the test of time. No change in name, no change in philosophy. They've had some rocky roads, some ups and downs. However, they stood the test of time. And so you asked me about the 110 candidates. Yes, I think it's a good sign of democracy in Bermuda, people coming forward. But the electorate has to understand and think through, based upon who wins individually, who is going to be able to be a minister, who's going to be able to form a government. And I wrote another piece, by the way, in terms of coalitions, in terms of the strengths and the weaknesses. And so I think we have to be mindful of the fact that, yes, it's nice to know everybody's running, but guess what? Who can really be a minister? And what I've seen in some cases is people are asking about, who are all these people? Where do they come from? What is their experience? And so I think we have to be mindful of Bermuda has to carry on in the international arena and to be seen to have effective and competent people running the country. Definitely. And so, yes, I'm biased as a C7 candidate. However, we have to really think through the fact that the PLP are the party that stood the test of time, and their individual members are strong persons with experience, the party also, to make sure that we can run the country after the election. So that's my long answer to your short question, but thank you for that question, because I think it's very, very important.
That was perfect. Well, thank you for that.
Thank you.
So when election time comes around, we often hear this sentiment that the MPs only come around when it's time for an election. I know that in Bermuda we've been fortunate to have MPs who still canvass door to door, but younger members, I guess, of the Bermudian public are looking for other ways of engagement. What are your thoughts around canvassing and when you should show up and how you show up?
Sure. That's a constant question, to be honest, and I obviously agree that the canvassing allows for their personal one-on-one touch, but I think we need to now work towards the genuine engagement, which means that I am the MP, I'll come to you, but you also come to me, so that we have a better connection. And one of the interesting components for me has been that when we debated the minimum wage to get to $16.40, it was on a Friday night, of course, and we vehemently supported it, we being the PLP. The OBA opposed it. The next day, however, the OBA candidate was out canvassing, and people were happy to see him, which is fine. However, we have to understand that more fundamentally, it's the work that gets done. So on the one hand, we are supporting 1640 to give people a raise, and the OBA are saying no, but yet knocking on doors, and so we have to have much more consistency. And for me, at the time of the actual election, it's always interesting to make the contact, but all during the time, what do? I'm in the community doing different things. And so people can, if they wanted to, ask Ms. Simmons, for example, at Summerhaven, what does Anthony do to assist? Or what I do, which I don't tell people because I think it's more confidential, I suppose, is I provide food to them on every other month. And I go to see what Ms. Simmons needs and I assist her in that regard. There was one lady, for example, that we met during our canvassing some time ago. She did not use her water because her roof was not properly painted. What did we do? We knew about that and so we got somebody together and we paid to have the roof done. And one thing I've done for the All of Bermuda actually is I have my Insight program, and that was inspired by the fact that I believe Bermuda needs to have more financial literacy. And so I've invested in that for the past 3 years now, which is what I do. I pay to be on air, but I enjoy it because it provides a tremendous benefit. And so again, that's a long answer to your short question, which is what about what we do? And clearly though, it is more about doing stuff in the community than the face-to-face. It's the both very, very important. The other thing I will say real quick too is that realistically, the only thing a member of parliament can do as a member of parliament that no one else can do is speak on the floor when bills are being debated. And that's the one thing I enjoy also. And I think if anybody looks or asks anyone else about what happens in the House, I'm one of the MPs that speaks to almost every major bill that gets debated because, number one, I care. Number two, I find out what the constituents want. Number three, I have the expertise to add to the debate. And also what happens is sometimes on the floor, the OBA will say something that is either wrong or not clear, and I'll be able to stand up and to provide clarity in those regards. And so for me, it's a fun time, and yes, you may see politicians more during the election time, but we do a lot of work in behind the scenes all the way through to make sure that we are representing the people. So thank you for asking that question.
Yeah, that's a good one. And perhaps I think as you work with your constituents and you get an appreciation for how they'd like for you to engage with them, then it will shift, I guess, what the next few months or years even look like for you specifically.
Yes.
Thinking about the seniors in Bermuda, I know that as a government, you typically speak about how the seniors are revered, that they are honored, that we continue to prioritize them as a government. But then we also hear that sometimes it's not enough.
Yes.
What's your response to those seniors who feel that it's not quite enough?
Is that it's a big conversation, but we have to now talk more holistically about what our families are doing for our seniors. We talk a lot now about the sandwich generation in terms of we have middle-aged people effectively taking care of their parents and their children and their own children. And so government does have a national senior strategy which recognizes that there are going to be more and more seniors, especially I think it's 2027, at least 25% of Bermuda's population are going to be seniors. And so we have to do a lot of things around that. One of those things is at the hospital, we have to work with families to ensure that there are seniors that are there, that are not there for health reasons, can actually go back home. Yeah. Government has one plan whereby they will lend money to you to modify your house to make it more senior friendly. For example, take out the steps, widen the doors, and those kind of things. That's a major program. And also, of course, we recently actually put in place a program whereby home health care is paid more than it used to be. And so therefore, as long as you qualify, you can be paid to take care of your parents at home, whereas in the past you couldn't. And now we're going to be working also towards making some adjustments to the overall health program to more benefit seniors. And of course, as the Premier says all the time now, we do make sure that the PLP always gives a cost of living increase for pensioners, which obviously impacts seniors. And so there's lots to be done. There's more to be done, but we defer to Minister Tanae Furbert, who is on her portfolio, to give more details. But yes, we are doing lots and lots for our seniors.